Okay, so have you ever thought about what it would actually take to completely change a whole country's power system? Seriously revamp their whole electricity setup?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to look at that today.
Right on.
We're diving deep into Vietnam's big plans to transform their electricity grid.
Interesting.
And they want to move away from coal and go almost completely renewable by 2050.
Wow.
And get this, they're expecting electricity demand to increase 5 times over by then.
5 times?
That's right.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's some serious energy ambition.
For sure.
We've got reports, data, everything.
Okay.
We're going to break down how they think they can do this.
Sounds good.
We're looking at a report called Achieving a Net Zero Electricity Sector in Vietnam.
Okay.
It's from the IEA.
The International Energy Agency.
Right, and it was published just recently in November 2024.
Okay.
And the report was designed and directed by Laura Cossey.
Okay.
She's the Director for Sustainability Technology and Outlooks at the IEA. So some really interesting stuff in here.
Looking forward to it.
They're actually going to build more coal plants, but there's a special reason.
Okay.
And offshore wind is going to be huge. Way more important than you might think.
Interesting.
And then, of course, the question everyone will ask.
What's that?
Can they keep electricity affordable through all of this change?
Right. Yeah, that's a big question.
So maybe you can help us understand the starting point here.
Sure.
What's Vietnam's electricity situation like right now?
So Vietnam's energy demand has grown incredibly over the last 20 years.
Really?
Yeah, it's gone up 8 times.
8 times?
Yeah, 8 times.
Wow.
And this is because of their fast economic development.
Okay.
They've had 6% annual GDP growth.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's impressive. And a lot of their electricity consumption comes from industry.
Okay.
Particularly manufacturing. It actually makes up over 50% of their electricity use. And they've also done a really good job of getting electricity to pretty much everyone in the country.
That's a big accomplishment.
It is.
So what does their power generation mix look like right now?
Well, as of 2022, coal is still the biggest source.
Right.
It takes up about 41%. And then hydro is next at 35%.
Okay.
Gas is at 11%.
Got it.
And solar PV is growing really quickly. It's already at 10%.
So they're making progress with solar.
Yeah, definitely.
So they have this plan, this Power Development Plan 8, or PDP-8,
Right.
which is their roadmap to 2030 and beyond.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised by their goal to double electricity demand again by 2030.
Yeah, it's a pretty ambitious goal.
So what are some of the key elements of this PDP-8?
So one thing is that coal capacity will actually peak in the mid-2020s.
Okay.
And then it'll decline after that as plants get to be about 40 years old.
Interesting.
They'll also be expanding natural gas a lot until 2030.
Okay.
And then the big shift is that wind and solar PV will become the dominant sources by 2050.
Wow.
Especially wind. Oh, and they're even planning to convert some of their coal and gas plants to run on hydrogen and ammonia.
So even those plants will become cleaner.
Right.
I mean, doesn't that demand growth seem a little too fast?
Well, the IEA report actually suggests that even with their economic goals, the electricity demand might not grow quite as much as PDP-8 predicts.
Why is that?
Because of energy efficiency.
Oh.
The IEA scenarios take into account that homes, industries, and things like that will become more efficient.
So they're assuming people will just use less electricity overall.
Not necessarily less, but they'll use it more efficiently.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
For example, they'll be switching to high-efficiency electric motors in factories.
Interesting.
And a lot more people will be using energy-saving air conditioners and appliances.
That makes sense.
And heat pumps will be used more for industrial processes because they're 3 to 5 times more efficient.
Oh, wow.
This efficiency push would need a lot of investment, of course.
Right.
But the savings for consumers would be even bigger.
So it pays for itself in the long run.
Yeah, that's the idea.
So how are they actually going to power all this?
Renewables
time.
Exactly.
So break it down for us.
Well, solar PV and wind are going to grow a lot, especially after 2030.
Okay.
Both onshore and offshore wind.
And you mentioned offshore wind is going to be huge.
Yeah, the projected expansion is incredible.
How much are we talking?
Over 220 gigawatts by 2050 in the PDP-8 scenario.
220 gigawatts?
Yeah.
That's just mind-blowing.
It is, and a lot of that offshore wind will be used to make hydrogen.
Oh, so not all of it will go directly to the grid.
Right.
Okay, so what about all these coal plants they're building now?
Yeah, so it seems counterintuitive.
Right.
But it's really about meeting that short-term spike in demand while other sources catch up.
So kind of like a bridge.
Exactly.
So what happens to coal in the long term?
Well, its role changes a lot.
In what way?
It becomes less about providing a constant baseload of power and more about being flexible and providing backup.
Okay. Yeah.
So their capacity factors will go down.
Meaning they'll run less often.
Exactly. And that means they'll emit less, even if the plants are still there.
That's interesting.
By 2050, the remaining coal plants will either be shut down or converted to run on ammonia or biomass.
Okay, that makes sense. So they're not just abandoning coal overnight.
Right. It's a gradual transition.
But can a grid that relies so much on wind and solar actually keep up with demand?
That's a fair question.
Especially when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing.
Right. Well, the IEA analyzed Vietnam's grid in 2050, and they found that maintaining a secure supply of electricity is totally doable.
Even with all that wind and solar.
Yeah, especially in their NZE scenario, which assumes a very high percentage of renewables.
So how do they make it work?
Well, batteries will be important for short-term flexibility.
Okay.
They can store excess solar energy during the day and use it at night.
Makes sense.
And hydro will be really important for balancing things out seasonally.
Right, they already have a lot of hydro.
Yeah, and they're also looking at using flexible hydrogen production. Basically, it's a way to store excess wind energy for later use.
So basically, using hydrogen as a giant battery.
Kinda, yeah.
This all sounds great, but isn't all this clean energy technology really expensive?
It's definitely a big investment.
What's it going to cost Vietnam and their people?
Well, we'll talk more about the cost after a quick break.
So before the break, we were talking about the cost of all of this.
Right, the price tag for Vietnam's clean energy plan.
Exactly. And I think it's easy to get caught up in like the cool technology and the big ideas, but we have to think about like, what's it actually going to cost?
Absolutely. It's a crucial question.
Yeah, so will this actually make electricity more affordable or less affordable for people?
Well, the IEA report actually looked into that, and they found that while there will be big investments up front, especially for those offshore wind farms, the long-term outlook is actually pretty positive.
Really? So going green could actually save them money in the long run?
That's what the report suggests.
How does that work?
Well, one big factor is that the fuel for renewables like wind and solar is free.
Right.
Once you build the infrastructure, the costs to keep it running are pretty low.
Compared to what?
Compared to fossil fuel plants where you have to keep buying coal, oil, or gas.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then there are the efficiency measures we talked about earlier.
Like using less energy overall.
Right. Things like high-efficiency appliances and better insulation in buildings.
Right.
All of that can lead to big reductions in energy consumption.
So it's a bunch of things working together to lower costs.
Exactly. But what about jobs?
Oh, yeah, good point. We're talking about a huge shift in how Vietnam produces and uses energy.
Right.
Won't that disrupt industries and maybe lead to job losses?
Yeah, that's a valid concern, and it's something policymakers in Vietnam are thinking about a lot.
Okay.
That's where the idea of a just energy transition comes in.
A just energy transition.
Yeah, have you heard of that?
I don't think so.
So basically, it's about making sure the switch to clean energy is fair for everyone. Including workers in industries that might be affected by the changes.
Like coal workers?
Exactly. As Vietnam phases out coal plants, they need to provide support and retraining for those workers.
Right. You can't just abandon those people.
Exactly.
So what kind of support are they thinking about?
Well, some workers might be able to move into jobs in the renewable energy sector.
Okay.
Like installing solar panels or maintaining wind turbines.
Interesting.
Others might need to learn totally new skills for different industries.
So it's about making sure they have options.
Right. The key is to make sure those workers have access to the resources and training they need to transition smoothly.
Okay.
And Vietnam is actually getting help from other countries, too.
Really?
Yeah, through things like the Just Energy Transition Partnership.
So about that?
It's where developed countries are helping to pay for these efforts.
Wow. So they're not going it alone.
Definitely not.
That's great to hear. It sounds like they're really trying to think about all the impacts of this transition.
Yeah, they're considering the social and economic side of things, not just the technical stuff.
But even with the best plans, there are always challenges.
Of course.
Are there any areas where things could go wrong or where they need to be really careful?
One big area to watch is grid management.
What do you mean?
As they add more renewable energy, especially from those big offshore wind farms, they need to make sure their transmission grid can handle it.
Right, because if they don't have enough capacity, it could cause problems.
Exactly. It's like if you try to stream a bunch of movies on a slow internet connection.
Things get glitchy.
Yeah, exactly.
So are they upgrading their grid?
Yeah, they're putting a lot of effort into modernizing it.
Okay.
building new transmission lines, and using smart grid technologies to help balance supply and demand.
So they're thinking ahead.
Yeah, and there's another interesting idea. They're considering demand response.
Demand response. Have you heard of that?
I don't think so.
So basically, it's a way to get consumers involved in balancing the grid.
Consumers like me and you. Yeah, imagine your electricity provider could send you a message on your phone
Okay.
asking you to maybe delay running your dishwasher or charging your car for a little while, like
Right.
during peak demand times.
And why would I do that?
Well, you might get a discount on your bill.
Oh, so there's an incentive.
Exactly.
Interesting. So it's a way to shift energy use to times when there's less strain on the grid.
Right, kind of like crowdsourcing grid management.
That's pretty cool.
It is.
But even with all of this, I still worry that relying so much on wind and solar might make the grid vulnerable.
How so?
What happens if there's not much wind or it's cloudy for a long time?
That's a valid concern, and the IEA report looked at that too.
Okay.
They found that Viet Nam can definitely maintain a reliable power supply even in those situations.
So they're confident.
Yeah, and remember, they have a diverse energy mix, including hydro, which can help balance out seasonal variations.
Right.
And they're also exploring some pretty innovative solutions, like using hydrogen as a form of energy storage.
Hydrogen. I thought hydrogen was mostly for fuel cell cars and things like that.
It's used for those things, but it can also be used to store energy.
How does that work?
So remember how we talked about using excess solar power to charge batteries?
Yeah.
Well, they can also use that extra electricity to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen.
Oh, wow.
And then they can store that hydrogen and use it later to generate electricity when they need it.
So it's like a giant energy reserve.
Yeah, kind of.
That's amazing.
It is pretty neat.
So with all this focus on wind, solar, and hydrogen, are there any other technologies they're considering?
What about nuclear?
Nuclear power.
Yeah. Is that something you've thought about?
It's not really a major part of their plan right now, is it?
Not in PDP-8, but the IEA report did look at some scenarios where nuclear plays a role,
Okay.
especially if they want to reach their net zero goals even faster.
Even faster than 2050.
Yeah, like by 2045.
5 years earlier. Wow.
It's ambitious, but why would they even think about nuclear?
Well, it's pretty controversial, isn't it?
Yeah, there are concerns about safety and waste disposal,
Right.
but it also has some advantages.
Like what?
Well, it's a very reliable source of electricity,
Okay.
and it can generate power 24/7 no matter the weather.
So it's a good baseload power source.
Yeah. And it's also carbon-free.
So it helps with decarbonizing.
Exactly.
But what about those safety and waste concerns?
Those are valid concerns, and it's important to talk about them openly.
Yeah.
Technology is always improving, and newer reactor designs are safer and better at managing waste.
So it's not as risky as it used to be.
Well, it's still complex, and every country has to decide if it's right for them.
Okay.
For Vietnam, it's not a main part of their plan right now, but it's something they're keeping in mind.
So it's an option for the future.
Yeah, potentially.
Okay. That makes sense. It's good to have options.
Absolutely.
But I want to bring it back to the people.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about tech policies and economics.
Right.
But this is really about people's lives, isn't it?
Of course, at the end of the day, it's all about people.
So how will all these changes affect the lives of everyday Vietnamese citizens?
Well, one of the biggest questions is, how will it affect electricity prices for consumers?
Yeah. Will people end up paying more or less for their electricity?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And the good news is that the IEA analysis suggests that electricity prices could actually become more affordable in the long run.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. But how is that possible?
Well, a couple of reasons.
Okay.
First, those efficiency measures we talked about.
Using less energy.
Right. As
Yeah.
people use less energy overall, it helps keep costs down.
Makes sense.
And second, once those renewable energy projects are built, the operating costs are pretty low.
Because the fuel is free.
Exactly. So over time, those savings can be passed on to consumers.
So it's like a win-win.
Yeah,
A cleaner environment and cheaper electricity bills.
pretty much.
I bet people are happy about that.
I'm sure they are.
But are there any downsides?
Well, there's always a chance that some people might be negatively affected during the transition.
Like who?
Even though the overall benefits of clean energy are clear,
Right.
we have to make sure it's a just and equitable transition.
Especially for fossil fuel workers.
Right. And there might also be concerns about the visual impact of large-scale renewable energy projects.
Oh yeah, like those big wind farms.
Yeah, some people might not be thrilled about having those near their homes.
So how are they dealing with that?
Community engagement is really important.
What does that mean?
It means involving local communities in the planning process, listening to their concerns and making sure they benefit from the projects.
So they're not just ignoring people's concerns.
No, they're trying to make it work for everyone.
It's good to hear.
Yeah. And speaking of working together, there's another interesting aspect of Vietnam's energy transition.
What's that?
The role of international collaboration.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that.
So how are other countries involved in this?
So how are other countries involved in this?
Well, it's actually a pretty big partnership. Developed countries are giving financial help through programs like the Just Energy Transition Partnership, which we talked about earlier.
Right.
That money helps Vietnam pay for clean energy projects.
Right.
And also to help those people who are affected by the shift away from fossil fuels.
So it's not just about building new stuff. It's also about helping people adapt.
Exactly. And there's also a lot of sharing of knowledge and technical stuff happening, too.
Okay.
Experts from all over the world are working with Vietnam to help them develop their renewable energy plans, design their smart grids, and put those energy efficiency programs into action.
So it's a real global effort.
Yeah, it is. Climate change is a global problem, so it makes sense that the solutions are global, too.
That's a good point. But what's in it for the other countries? Why are they putting so much effort into helping Vietnam reach its goals?
Well, it's partly about global solidarity, recognizing that we all have to work together on this.
Right.
But there are also some benefits for the countries that are helping out. Well, for one thing, supporting clean energy in developing countries like Vietnam actually helps reduce emissions globally.
Right.
And that benefits everyone in the long run.
Right.
And these partnerships can also create opportunities for businesses in those developed countries.
Oh, interesting. Like how?
Well, say a company that makes solar panels.
Okay.
They might find new markets in Vietnam as they build out their solar energy capacity.
So it's not just about helping out. It's also good for business.
Exactly. It's a win-win.
So Vietnam is kind of leading the way here.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
Can other countries copy what they're doing, or is Vietnam a special case?
I think Vietnam offers some really valuable lessons for other countries,
Okay.
especially those in Southeast Asia and other developing regions that are facing similar challenges with their energy systems.
Right.
So their commitment to a long-term vision, their mix of different energy sources,
Okay.
their focus on modernizing the grid, and their attention to the social side of the energy transition.
Right, making sure people aren't left behind.
Exactly. Those are all things that other countries can learn from.
But every country is different, right?
Of course, every country has its own situation, resources, and political landscape.
So there's no magic formula?
No, but Vietnam shows that ambitious clean energy goals are possible.
Even for countries that are still developing.
Right?
Their story is really inspiring.
It is. It shows that we can create a cleaner, more sustainable energy future if we really want to.
It gives me hope.
Me too.
But I'm also thinking about the challenges.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What are some of the biggest hurdles that other countries might face as they try to transition to clean energy?
Well, one of the biggest ones is often money.
Okay.
Especially for developing countries that might not have a lot of resources to invest in clean energy.
Right.
That's why those international partnerships are so important.
To help from developed countries.
Exactly. And another obstacle can be politics.
Okay.
Sometimes there's resistance from people who benefit from the fossil fuel industry.
Right. They don't want things to change.
Yeah. So to overcome these barriers, you need strong leaders,
Yeah.
clear communication, and a lot of public support.
So it's not just about technology. It's also about people.
Definitely.
And I'm also curious about technologies. Are there any new technologies that could really change the game and make this transition happen faster?
Oh, there's some really cool stuff on the horizon.
Like what?
Well, batteries are getting better and cheaper all the time,
Right.
which is super important for managing all that wind and solar energy.
Makes sense.
And there's also a lot of interest in things like floating offshore wind farms.
Floating?
Yeah, they can be built further out at sea where the wind is even stronger.
Wow.
And then there's green hydrogen, which we talked about before.
Right.
That could be huge, not just for electricity, but also for things like transportation and industry.
So there's a lot to be excited about.
Definitely the future of clean energy is looking pretty bright.
But we don't have forever to figure this out, do we?
No, we don't. The climate is changing and we need to act fast.
So what needs to happen in the next few years to make sure we're on track?
Well, we need to see a lot more investment in clean energy.
Okay.
We need to phase out coal plants faster.
Right.
And we need to really focus on reducing energy demand through efficiency.
Using less energy overall.
Right. And it can't just be one or two countries doing this. It has to be a global effort.
A global team effort.
Exactly.
Well, Vietnam's story shows us it's possible. It's possible to make big changes and move towards a cleaner energy future.
Yeah, and they're doing it even while their economy is growing rapidly.
It's a real beacon of hope.
Absolutely.
It's a reminder that even though the challenges are huge, we can create a more sustainable and equitable world.
For ourselves and for future generations.
Well said. Well, this has been an amazing journey exploring Vietnam's energy transformation.
It has.
We've learned so much about their plans, their strategies, and their partnerships.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting deep dive.
And to you, our listener, we hope this has given you a better understanding of what it takes to create a truly sustainable energy future.
We hope you've enjoyed it.
And we encourage you to stay curious, stay engaged, and join us in working towards a cleaner, healthier planet.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep diving deep,